I think it's a good time to use a particular controversy to explain a certain concept. Now, if some of you have been following the drama that's been going on with the WWE, you know that Vince McMahon, the now former chairman and CEO of World Wrestling Entertainment, has been forced out of the company due to the allegations of rape that have been made against him. Now, this isn't like the rape allegations that were given before. These also include sex trafficking, meaning that women were transported for the purposes of performing sexual services for him and apparently some other male executives as well. This particular video is not about sex trafficking, which is, I don't think I have to explain why that's horribly evil. What is significant here is the revelation that Stephanie McMahon, Vince McMahon's daughter, knew about what was going on. And one of the questions that some people ask, and particularly some feminists do ask, is why did Stephanie not say anything? If she knew that these were going on, which it seems very likely that she did know, although allegation not proven, but in my personal opinion, it seems very likely that she did know. Why didn't she report what her father was doing? Why didn't she put a stop to it? Well, basically the idea is because of the damage that it would do to the company that she was going to inherit. It would have financially harmed her bottom line. The money that she makes as an employee and a stockholder, I believe she is still a stockholder in WWE Entertainment. And that this capital interest or this position of privilege in the capitalist class is more important to her than her status as a woman. And this plays very much into the idea of primary and secondary contradiction. Now, as Marx laid out, capitalist society, just as many other societies, are made up of a series of contradictions, some less significant than others. Some contradictions even dominate other contradictions, and that there's going to be one overall which wields the most influence that holds the rest of them in the place that they're in. And in capitalism, that would be class struggle. Essentially, the question would come down to, what are you going to get equality, real equality, under a system like capitalism of inequality? I mean, to me, the idea is simply ridiculous. You're not going to get equality under a system predicated on inequality. That's the whole point of capitalism, is that it's unfair. I mean, it's literally marketed to people as being unfair. That's literally the justification for its existence. It's literally supposed to exist because it's unfair. It's not even just like a side effect that people who support capitalism acknowledge. It's one of the selling points. It's one of the purposes of it. And you would understand that essentially you would have to undo the primary contradiction of capital first. Although in this age, we would understand that imperialism is the primary contradiction. You would have to undo imperialism. And then from that, it would damage capital, the class struggle of capital versus labor in many countries simultaneously. And that would allow capital and labor as the primary contradiction to be fought next. And then when that was fought, you could then start beginning the socialist society, which could then tackle all the other smaller contradictions. That is the scientific Marxist outlook. And a lot of feminists did respond, oh, so your revolution has to come first. And that can seem very patronizing. It can seem very insulting. Yes. I do understand that. Now, to answer that in the context of Marxist struggle, because there'd be two contexts, the context of outside Marxist struggle and inside Marxist struggle. Outside Marxist struggle, no, you wouldn't have to do that first. You could, if you honestly believed that in a system like capitalism, there could be equality between men and women, then no, then the class struggle wouldn't have to come first. But if you are a Marxist, you would essentially have to acknowledge, yes, the contradiction between capital and labor would have to come first. Now, that is not to say that you cannot fight for women's equality. I'm not saying that. I'm saying acknowledging that the struggle against the class struggle is the primary contradiction, or in this day and age, it would be imperialism. Now, here's where the trouble with that begins. In past revolutions, one of them being the Bolshevik Revolution and the Chinese Revolution being the two best examples, though you could also lump the Cuban Revolution in with this as well, was that you were not going to get any concessions on women's rights in those three societies. So the solution became, if you wanted equality between men and women, you were not going to get it in the capitalist society or the semi-feudal society in the case of China. You had to leave that society and join the revolutionary armed struggle, where you would be treated as an equal. That's the difference between past practice and today's experience. There is no revolutionary armed movement to go to where you would receive that equality. And that's the point. That kind of break is what was made in the past. You went over to the revolution in order to get that concession. But there is no that revolution to go over to. And that's the problem. Essentially, to fight for the equality of women, you're going to have to fight for it inside of the context of capitalism, because there is no alternative revolutionary group to go to. And I'm not just meaning that there is a party. I mean, there has to be like an actual armed struggle. There has to be an actual real significant movement that you leave your regular life to go and join. To use the example of, leaving the village to go join the gorillas in the mountain. There is nothing like that in the first world. And there has never been anything like that in the first world, ever. And there's, frankly, as long as the first world exists, there isn't going to be. But that's kind of the point of third worldism. That's what we don't have. And that's the difference between the two struggles. And that's the difference between fighting for it in the context of capitalism and fighting it in the context of Marxism when you are a Marxist. So if you were not a Marxist, none of what I just said would actually apply to you. I'm only applying this to people who are of the Marxist ideology. This represents a limitation of the objective first worldist situation. I'm not saying don't fight for women's rights or to fight for women's rights. I'm only saying this is the objective situation, and you have to determine what it is that you think is the right course of action. Of course, I would say fighting for women's rights is the right thing to do, of course, particularly with regards to reproductive rights, because it is a matter of health. And that is essentially as equally important whether you're inside or outside the revolutionary movement. It's like saying whether or not there should be a cure for cancer in what society. Well, of course, any society, there should be a cure for cancer. Absolutely. Regardless. In some contexts, you could see the fight for feminism inside of capitalism as a kind of social reform to make capitalism better. You could interpret it that way. Personally, I don't see it that way, but I can see why some people would think of it that way. Now, this should be compared to the black struggle in the United States, which I would say is not a fair comparison. The black struggle in the United States, I would say, if done along a Marxist lines, obviously not along a liberal lines, can be a revolutionary movement in and of itself. So the struggle for black liberation in a Marxist context would or could potentially lead to a revolution, whereas the women's struggle in the context, or primarily a women's struggle in terms of a Marxist context, would not lead to a revolution. I'm not saying do or do not fight for women's liberation. I'm just showing you the objective difference between the two. And this fits into something that was written for Kasama Project a number of years ago, I believe probably over 10 years ago now. Something that was very important that they noticed from the Nepalese revolution. What was needed was a radical rupture. In previous revolutions, there has always been a radical rupture that you took that signified you were done. You were out of normal mainstream society and you were now a part of the revolution. In China, one of those radical ruptures was to, those Chinese haircuts where it was just the hair in the back and it went into a braid, but the front was shaven. Those were called queues, and they were particularly a symbol of, I believe it was an intellectuals, a class position, etc. And those of that group who left to become revolutionaries would cut the queue, would get rid of that hair, which was an unthinkable thing to do when you were a member of that group. That was the radical rupture. That was your sign. No, I am not a part of this anymore, and I will never be a part of it again. Where you make that serious break between mainstream society and the revolutionary movement. In Nepal, and I'm assuming other places as well, a woman would say, no, I'm not going to marry this guy that you have said that I have to marry, and then would leave the village and join the revolutionary movement. And that would be that radical rupture, that disobedience on the tradition of arranged marriage, because she could never go back as a result. That would be the radical rupture. There is no radical rupture in the first world because there's no radical revolutionary movement to join. There's nothing to make a break for. It simply just doesn't exist. If there were a real revolutionary movement and you had made that decision, you had made that one gesture that said that you were done and you were never coming back, then you can make it. But that isn't here. It's not here, and conditions of the first world being what they are, etc. So I'm not saying don't fight for women's rights. I'm not saying that. I think you definitely should. But I think it's important to do that because of the absence of a legitimate revolutionary movement that is radical enough to which you could make that break from and be a part of that movement to create as many of the changes as possible by eliminating the contradiction or the primary contradiction of capital and labor. That's all I'm really saying. And it took a while for me to explain all of that in the proper context without it being completely misinterpreted and having someone just scream at you that you're a misogynist saying women shouldn't fight for equality, that's not what I'm saying. So I just wanted to explain that because I think that that was something I wanted to explain before. And this news of Stephanie McMahon knowing about what Vince McMahon was doing and her choosing her class position over her position as a woman would be a good example of that. And previous examples would be Herman Cain. Why Herman Cain, before he died of COVID, why would he continually side with the Republican Party over the Democrat Party? Why would he side with the rich white men over the poor black men? Because he was a rich black man. And in the end, he's going to have more privilege being a rich man, a rich black man, than even being a poor white man. So to him, being rich is more important than being black. His class position takes precedent over his race. So even in his mind, he's got his priorities. He's decided what they are, and he knows which side made him rich, which side lifted him up above other black people, or the Uncle Tom, if you want to use the expression. So I just wanted to explain all of that out because it's a great way to tie everything together and explain all of these concepts all at once. So again, thank you for watching. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.